Hello! I just tweeted I'm literally losing my mind and I can't talk about why. Okay! Welcome to Healthcare Triage Live. Yay! Okay, wow, it's going to take focus. Here we go. Thank you so much for joining us on Healthcare Triage Live. We're sorry we're a few minutes late. We had some goings on in the office here that were exciting. And we're just happy to be here. So let's start as always by thanking you. We just noticed right before we started that we forgot to get the pill and the bear out. So see if you can spot. And I didn't change my shirt between episodes. Man, we are a force of nature today. So see if you can spot all the mistakes in future upcoming Healthcare Triage episodes. Anyway, as always, the usual stuff, housekeeping. Thank you so much for your support. Patreon.com/healthcaretriage. We're getting more and more support every week. It's amazing and humbling. We really do appreciate it. Facebook.com/healthcaretriage. Check out the Reddit. Get merch at hctmerch.com. We're thinking of making a new mug soon, so these will be collector's editions when we make a new mug. And that's it. Let's get started because I'd rather do real stuff. EHHawk015. Are there any major idiopathic diseases that affect a large amount of people that we just sort of shrug at and have no idea about? Of course! Irritable bowel syndrome. I mean, just to pick one off the top of my head. Tons of stuff. We don't know what it is. We don't know what causes it. We don't know how to treat it, really. We don't know what to do. Horrible. Fibromyalgia. Huge problems where we sort of know the collection of symptoms. We know it really affects people. We have no idea really what the mechanism is nor how to treat it. There are tons of others. But normally, we call them idiopathic because we don't know what causes them. And of course, the second we figure out what causes them, then we can call it something else. So they're idiopathic by definition because we don't know. But there are lots that we don't. We just don't know what it is. And we do our best to manage the symptoms, even if we cannot figure out the cause. And so, yes, there's your answer. AZ, is barefoot running technique better for your joints? I wonder if one of my good friends could be doing this and trolling me. He's got those shoes that have the toe fingers, and he swears that like they're real, and I'm just sort of like, nah. And they always there's like this book which is about like the running barefoot and how those it's a certain indigenous people and they run like hundreds of miles a day for the sheer joy of it. So look, the reason we wear shoes mostly is because we need to protect our feet because we don't live in sandy beaches, most of us, and we go around and you can get your feet cut, and that's why we do it. Is barefoot running better for your joints? The truth of the matter is that running is often not great for your joints. There's a reason we call it sort of high impact. And, we probably were not evolutionarily designed to run all of the time. It's just not the case. So is running barefoot better? I don't know. I'm sure there have not been any long-term randomized controlled trials. There are pages that you can find, and in fact, you linked to one, barefootrunning.fas.harvard.edu, which you say has evidence saying that it's better. And I'm going to that website right now, and so they say 2 papers. They're in Nature, so I'm going to guess that they're more like science-based than human prospective studies. So one looks like it's foot strike patterns and collisional forces. The other looks like it's endurance running and the evolution of Homo. I don't think, therefore, that they're doing a lot of prospective human-based studies. If you want to run and you're running in places where you can run in bare feet and you want to, that's great. But, lots of people are running in places with hard surfaces where they could damage or hurt their feet, in which case you're probably better off wearing shoes. And I'm not going to weigh in any further than that because there really isn't any good evidence. Garance the Kid, does wearing makeup have any ill effect on the skin? It makes people wash their face every night to remove it, but is it clogging pores or damaging the skin in any way? Well, I think you hit upon the few ways they can. If you have an allergic reaction to it, that would be bad. If you have some sort of chemical or contact reaction to it, that would be bad. If you leave it on and it keeps your skin from breathing or clogs pores, that would be bad. But otherwise, short term, probably fine. I assume that most makeup companies are testing it to make sure that it's hypoallergenic and to make sure it's not hurting people. Of course, they test it on animals sometimes, which makes people very upset, understandably. So I'm going to say there's probably not a ton of evidence that it has long-term damaging effects. And of course, if it makes you wash your face every night, maybe some people might argue that that's a beneficial effect. Again, you're asking me a question for I bet there's not a lot of evidence, and therefore that again is the long-term. I mean, that's probably the extent of what I can answer for it. Ikuan, what do I think of Bernie Sanders' healthcare plan? Sorry in advance if this causes all his online fans to come after me. Well, there's a good question. So, Bernie Sanders is at heart advocating for Medicare for all, basically single-payer healthcare system. And to his credit, he has been advocating for this for a long time. This is not a new thing. Bernie Sanders has probably been the one guy in the Senate for years that has advocated for a single-payer healthcare plan. In fact, I think even when I've talked about single-payer as a means to sort of reform health insurance in the United States, I've literally stated there's only one senator that supports it. This is why it's Bernie Sanders. So kudos to him consistently, and he's willing to put his money where his mouth is. I have been an advocate in the past, more active advocate for a single-payer healthcare plan. This is, of course, before we had any kind of healthcare reform. And I am on record. I appeared in the Colbert Report in 2009 talking about the benefits of a single-payer healthcare plan. But I've always been cognizant of the negatives of a single-payer healthcare plan as well. One is it's a political non-starter for most people. There's only one senator who supports it. So even if you have a president who supports it, you got to have senators to vote for it. You need to have a majority of people in the House. So, it's always been sort of I was an active advocate for it before we had legitimate healthcare reform. But when the Affordable Care Act, I'm for healthcare reform and improving the healthcare system more than I am an advocate for any kind of individual way to reform it. So I have been, and consistently been, I think single payer is a decent way of reforming the healthcare system. We would improve access immensely because everybody would be insured at the drop of a hat. There's a reason that Medicare, people love Medicare. It works. Everyone over the age of 65 is covered and has access to healthcare across the United States. It's great for access. Where single payer falls down and where Bernie Sanders' healthcare plan falls a little bit short, and where I think some advocates fall short, is in their too sunny optimism about how it will handle cost control in the United States. Everyone doesn't love Medicare. Lots of people think Medicare spends too much money, that it's rising, its rate of increase in spending is too fast. Many people feel that it doesn't pay doctors well enough, that it doesn't pay for other things well enough. And those are the downsides of a single-payer healthcare system. The way that national single-payer healthcare systems control costs is by squeezing a lot of the inputs into the healthcare system. Like doctors. They pay doctors less, not as much less as doctors will cry, but they do pay doctors less than doctors can make from private insurance often in the United States. They pay less for drugs in other countries than they do here. They pay less for services, for other things as well. They say no more. Some people will call that rationing. I think you can do rationing well and say we'll pay for stuff that works and doesn't, but other countries say no more. That's how their single-payer healthcare systems control costs. In the United States, Medicare doesn't do that as well as the other systems do, and that's why Medicare is not. Now, you will see advocates who will argue, well, we can get such great savings out of the administrative costs alone that would compensate for some of the distance, and we could reduce healthcare spending. And I think there's a little bit of truth to that. That will drop our overall healthcare spending like this, but it won't affect the curve of growth. So we could cut some fat out of the healthcare system today by reducing administrative overhead, the billing overhead. We can, but that doesn't change necessarily the rate of growth of healthcare. And our long-term healthcare spending would still be growing at a rate which might not be sustainable as long as we're still not willing to squeeze and say no. And I don't know that America yet has a stomach for that. I don't think that the plan, Bernie Sanders' plan, to be totally honest, is not yet fully fleshed out. I mean, he's basically talked about in general how he might pay for it. And I give him credit for that in terms of increased taxes here, reduced overhead over there. That's fine, even though that'll still be politically very difficult to get across. It still does not address the long-term problems that still exist with Medicare and with a political single-payer system in the United States moving forward. In order to slow healthcare spending, we have to slow healthcare spending. Significant drops in healthcare spending immediately, you have to also remember, would have a monstrous effect on the United States on the United States economy. With 16% of the economy being healthcare right now, if not 18% of the GDP. If we just said tomorrow we're dropping it by a huge percentage of points, that would almost by definition put us into a depression because GDP would drop. And so if you're going to shrink the healthcare sector that greatly, quickly, you would need to still find jobs or find ways to compensate for that, or you'd have to create, let healthcare be a huge jobs program. It's complicated. It really is. You have to remember that the Affordable Care Act, for all its drama, is still a pretty refined, non-revolutionary. I'm looking for the word that's the opposite of revolutionary. Incremental. It's an incremental reform. It only affected a small percentage of the United States population. It gave about 10 to 16 million people private insurance. It was supposed to give about 16 million more people Medicaid, and that was it. It wasn't this huge radical reform that Medicare for all would be. Now, having said that, if it was politically feasible and we could pass Medicare for all tomorrow, I don't think at the end of days, I don't think it's even that bad in the sense that it would dramatically change access. It would make things so much easier in terms of everybody would just have one system. It would reduce administrative burden quite a bit. But it would have its own problems in terms of how it would change the pharmaceutical industry and innovation, how it would change the way doctors compete, how it would change doctors' incomes and how they want to practice and where they would practice and what they're willing. A lot of those things would change and are important and would make a big difference. Government is usually good at cost control. Government is usually, in other countries, I'm saying in other words, government control of healthcare usually in other countries is good at cost control. It is reasonably good at healthcare delivery of service and making sure that things are equitable. It's not necessarily great at innovation. And that is where lots of people get concerned about how would these change things. And these are big changes. So that was a very long-winded way of saying, I don't think, I don't roll my eyes and I'm going to be like, Bernie Sanders is crazy. Medicare for all is an option. I do think politically it's, if you're asking me honestly, a real non-starter. In the sense of the Affordable Care Act was barely a starter, barely got passed, and had the support of 60 senators at the time and a majority of the House. Single payer does not have that. Single payer in Vermont, which is, we're going to spend the whole time talking about this, aren't we? Single payer in Vermont, which, was reasonably viable. So I think we've even might have talked about that on Healthcare Triage, but not long ago, the governor's race in Vermont was actually between different candidates who could be the biggest advocate of single payer, because Vermont was going to pass a state-based single payer program. They were going to do it using a private insurance company because I think it's Blue Cross has already 75% or more of the population, and because Vermont was liberal enough that they were like, we could do this. We could have a single payer plan. Everyone is on one Blue Cross plan. It's going to be that way. We'll take the ACA money. We'll get a waiver. We'll prove that single payer works. We'll do it in a state that loves the idea of single payer. And they couldn't get it done. They couldn't get it done. They couldn't make the tax numbers work in a way that were palatable to the public. They couldn't make all the inputs work. It failed. And there have been many articles written about why it's failed. But it failed in Vermont. And if you can't make it done in Vermont using a private company, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to get it done in the United States, where a majority of states are not blue, using public, not private input. So, this is one of those where it's I wouldn't campaign against it. I'm on record of being I'm fine with it. I'm fine with anything that improves the U.S. healthcare system. I just personally don't think it's got a chance, and I'm a realist. I get behind things when I think that advocating for them might spur change, or when I think there's a real chance of something happening. In the past, when I was willing to talk about single payer, I was willing to talk about all options for reform because they all seemed equally viable. I was sort of pessimistic anything was going to get done. I was wrong. And they got the Affordable Care Act passed. And so that is now the status quo. And I would not be willing to give up that status quo to go back to something that we had before. Anyway, long-winded. Michelle Winfield 1, what are your thoughts on chlorine dioxide or miracle supplement? Well, you got the word miracle in there, so I'm against it. You've also got the word supplement in there, so I don't know how I could be for it. Miracle and supplement. I don't know how it could possibly be right. If something was a miracle, we would all do it. And supplements are unregulated, as we've talked about again and again and again. I don't even know what chlorine dioxide is. But if it was truly a miracle, we'd call it medicine, and we would use it. WizKid22193. Is there evidence to support of certain types of over-the-counter pain relief medicines, such as, I'm going to say, I think you tried to say asprin and Tylenol work better for certain pains such as headaches or muscle pain? There is evidence. There have been great meta-analyses and randomized controlled trials and everything else. And it turns out, and it's important for me to say right here, I am not a shill for any of these companies or any of the drug companies that make them. So, I'm going to try to give you the evidence. This is not me advocating for any pharmaceutical products. I think that the evidence overall says that if you treat pain, and I'm talking about acute short-term pain, with aspirin, about 30% of people get relief. With acetaminophen, about 40% of people get relief. With ibuprofen, about 50% of people get relief. Ibuprofen has been proven to be better at short-term pain relief than aspirin or acetaminophen. There you go. Having said that, you should recognize in what I just said that it's still not monster guaranteed relief, although the NNTs are pretty good. And so if I have to choose what I'm going to use, I take ibuprofen. I'm not your doctor. I'm not telling you what to take. You should talk to your doctor. I take ibuprofen when I have pain. That's what I tell my kids as well. Often I also think about it because ibuprofen actually also works to mediate swelling and to mediate inflammation, I should say, in ways that acetaminophen does not. So forced to choose, I take ibuprofen for pain. When you're talking about chronic pain, again, ibuprofen does better in the studies. It just does. Now, long-term chronic use of ibuprofen has been linked to GI issues and bleeding, which is why they tried to make the ones that don't with varying success. So you should not take anything chronically without talking to your doctor. Of course, acetaminophen, if you overdose, it's one of the major causes of liver disease and liver failure in the United States, so that's bad too. Fever, they're a little more equivalent, although I think still in some of the studies ibuprofen has a bit of an advantage. Now, we don't recommend that babies take ibuprofen. They have to be older. So sometimes we use acetaminophen for very small infants, only in conjunction with discussion with a healthcare provider. So babies will not get ibuprofen. But once again, if you're asking me what I give my children, it's ibuprofen because the research shows that it does a little bit better, and I'm not using it for chronic use. There you go. Of course, now there's more growing evidence that shows there's observational studies which panic some of my friends that show that use of ibuprofen has been linked to other diseases, including asthma and everything, and everybody gets freaked out. Those are a little more associative than causal, and all these things, you should not use them unless you have to. That's how it always is. You're weighing risks and benefits. Allison Moore asks, they say you should only lose 1 to 2 pounds a week, but is this a hard and fast rule? Is it okay to lose more than that? Does it matter if the person is just overweight versus morbidly obese? You're probably better off in general thinking in terms of percentages than in terms of pounds, because people who are very obese will find it easier at the beginning to lose large amounts of weight. But it's always important to think about, we're going to go off in a digression here. So I love watching The Biggest Loser. I watch it with my family. They love The Biggest Loser. I've even, I think, written about this at the New York Times. What appalls me about The Biggest Loser is that they focus so heavily on exercise and so little on diet as the mechanism for weight loss. And also, they seem to believe that massive amounts of weight loss are awesome and that you should be competing for double-digit losses every week. Now, one, you're not always sure that's healthy. You might be starving yourself. Two, it doesn't make for usually sustainable weight loss. There's a new show on called My Diet is Better Than Yours. And we also love to watch that show. And I think it's awesome because they picked 5 crazy diets. And I shouldn't say crazy diets. That was terrible of me because you shouldn't judge what anyone else is eating, period. But they picked 5 diets. I said crazy because some of them are saying things which are utterly against science. So I should say they are anti-evidence based. But anyway, they're comparing 5 diets. And these people are losing, on average, it feels like 1 to 5 pounds a week. And they get disappointed, and the people running the show seem to be like, you lost 2 pounds this week. How do you feel about that? And I'm at home screaming, that's great. If they're losing 1 to 2 pounds a week consistently over like a month or two, and they're like, this doesn't even feel like a diet. That's what we want. Like, not 20-pound weight losses from starving and exercising all day. That is not sustainable. So the reason that we say usually small sustainable weight loss is because small changes that you enjoy and are okay with, that's how you do sustainable long-term weight loss that might be keepable, that you won't like do it and come back. It's a difference between sort of behavioral change and changing what you eat and your overall intake as opposed to saying you're on a diet. Having said that, even people who make small sustainable changes, if they are very obese, they're going to lose more than 1 to 2 pounds a week, because it's amazing, sort of like if you just stop eating huge amounts and you exercise a bit, you're going to see big changes. But you want something that is sustainable over the long term. That's going to be in smaller amounts over a long time than for massive pushes. So is it okay if you're losing more than 1 to 2 pounds a week? For some people, probably yes. Is it something, but would 1 to 2 pounds a week over the long term, I would be thrilled if anyone was seeing that. That's awesome. And I wish that like my diet is better than yours would celebrate and push for that and recognize that than this constant competition about who could lose the most pounds in a week, which really is not how you do long-term sustainable weight loss. Having said that, Allison, if you're talking about yourself, you should talk to your doctor. I don't know what you weigh. I don't know about your medical history. I don't know anything else. And I don't know what the right amount of weight is that you should lose a week. You should talk to your doctor and figure that out. But if you are losing 1 to 2 pounds a week, it's awesome. It's great. And if you need to lose weight, of course, then that's the kind of long-term, slow and steady wins the race change that everybody should shoot for. Looking at the clock to see how much time is left. We'll do a few more fast here. Ikawan slips back in. What do you think of Obama's call to cure cancer? Is it really feasible? I feel about it the exact same way I felt about it when President Bartlett was going to do it on the West Wing. And I feel about the way that everybody told him about it. Like, yeah, that, I understand the impulse and it's wonderful to say that, but, really? Come on. It's like, yes, I would be thrilled if we cured cancer. I don't think saying it in the State of the Union makes it so. There's lots of people and billions of dollars going into this, and they're all super dedicated to curing cancer. And it's not that no one was saying do it. It's hard. It's really hard. And it will take huge amounts of money and research and dedication. And if we truly wanted to do it, we'd have to pass that kind of legislation and spend a lot. And I'm not talking like $1 billion here and $1 billion there. We're doing that already. I'm talking about huge amounts of money in order to make this happen. To make it a major, major goal of the United States, we're not doing that. I think lots of things get said in the State of the Union. I understand the call. I understand the impulse. I understand why it's a popular applause line. I will feel much more ready to talk about it when I see it backed up with actual legislation and an actual plan, which is basically why they talked Bartlett out of doing it. Christina Lai, is there any research on when to start babies on solid food? Many sources say 4 to 6 months, others say 6. I have written a systematic review, published in Pediatrics, I believe, which looked at whether allergies, because for a long time, people were like, don't start kids on solid food because, if you start them too early, they get more likely to get allergies. And what we showed was that's not true. That actually there's, evidence on both sides. If you wait too long, they get allergies. If you do food deprivation, kids get allergies. If you do food introduction, they might get allergies. No one really knows for sure. But the general consensus is 4 to 6 months, which means starting like at 4 months. Talk to your doctor, though. And there are rules about it. Usually, you start with the cereals, then you advance, and you should be introducing like one food at a time every few days, because that gives you a chance to see if the baby's allergic. If you start throwing tons of foods at them and they have an allergic reaction, you don't know what it was. And of course, you want to go from like easier to eat foods to harder to eat foods. But this is stuff you should talk about with your doctor. We started our kids, for the record, at 4 months. That's when we started the rice cereals. Putting my money where my mouth is. But 4 to 6 months is the general recommendation. People do not say before 4 months. One more question. Lokalugi. I heard recently that applying ice to a soft tissue injury may not be helpful in assisting recovery. Is there evidence to back this up, or is it a myth? So when you're talking about recovery, I don't think there's a ton of evidence. When ice in general does help to reduce swelling, certainly in the short term, because it's just a mechanism. If you apply heat to your body, it allows your capillaries and everything expands because it wants more blood flow so that it can, shed its own internal heat. If you apply ice, everything contracts. So that means the capillaries contract, maybe the lymphatics. Everything contracts means less stuff can get there. You get less swelling. So ice in the short term might help with swelling and it might help with pain because ice has been shown to sort of, reduce pain receptors and everything else. But I don't know that it actually gets recovery going faster. I'm willing to sort of say that I think the evidence is not really there. Having said that, as always, you're weighing benefits and harms. There's very little harm as long as you're doing it safely and not causing hypothermia or burning your skin with super cold ice. And you obviously don't want to apply the ice directly to your skin. And there's probably not much harm, so I wouldn't, caution anyone or tell people not to do it if they feel like it's doing good. And that's where we're going to stop. We're going to write down the rest of these questions and we'll save them for next week. We will be back next week for Healthcare Triage Live. Friday, we have a Healthcare Triage News, which relates exactly to the Healthcare Triage on Monday. Even though we filmed, because of some snafus, it may be a little bit odd, and some things I say may make it sound like a video was a year ago, even though it was a week ago, but just ignore that. Regardless, Fridays, then next Monday, we'll have a brand new Healthcare Triage. Next Wednesday, Healthcare Triage Live. Continue to support us on Patreon. We really do appreciate it. Patreon.com/healthcaretriage. Consider buying some merchandise at hctmerch.com. Check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/healthcaretriage. Check out the Reddit and Reddit/r/HC Triage. And I think I nailed everything right on the first try, so I'm signing off right there. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week.